Okay, now we're going to talk about using formulas in our thing, functions, actually mathematical functions. Excel has a tremendous number of statistical and mathematical functions that allow us to do all kinds of data analysis. So let me give you an example. Let's say we wanted to take the sine of an angle. So first let's create some angles, call them theta. Okay, and this will come out in radians. So let me just write that down so we know what we're talking about in radians. And so let's make up some numbers. Let's start with 0 and then say equals this cell plus 0.3. And let's pull this down a little ways. Let's say down to about there. And let's go a little further. We can actually drag that a little further. Let's go down to there. And then we go from 0 to a little bit more than pi. Now, if we want to compute the sine of the angle, we say equals, and we start by, we might guess that the function is called sine, but if we just type SIN, you'll see the most recent, it shows me most recently used function. You gotta look closer here, is sine. I click on that, and it says sine of a number. And so the number I want is obviously the theta, so I put that and put parenthesis close, and that gives me the sine of the number. Now I can pull this down, and that copies them and gives me the sine of the number. So that's how I take use the sine function. There are tremendous number of mathematical functions. If you look over on the right here, you can see here's a list of my recently used functions. Sum, average, if, count, max, all kinds, standard deviation, and there's a list of all of the functions. You can just see there's just hundreds of functions. So what's an example of a different function? What if I want to use a function that has a range as my input, not just a single cell? So for example, if I wanted to take the average of this column, I can simply go equals average. And by the way, it pops it up right there, so I know how to spell it in case I'm having trouble. And it says average, and then it wants it says number 1, comma number 2, but you can also put a range just by highlighting the range like that and put close parenthesis, and it gives me the average, 0.541. Just as an aside, if I would like more or less precision in my column, one of the things I can do is there's a thing up at the top here that says increase, this says decrease decimal, increase decimal. So if I wanted one more decimal place, I could do that, or if I wanted one less decimal place, I can do that. And by highlighting the whole column, it changes the whole column that I've used. So that's how you do a function like, for example, the average. There are all kinds of functions. I could compute the average differently. I could compute it by computing equals. I could say the sum of all of these numbers. And so there's the sum, and I could compute the average by taking the sum divided by the number of the entries. So I could say that the average equals, I could say this equals the sum divided by the number of entries. Now I could count them, or I could use the function count of the number of entries. And you'll notice I get the same exact answer I got here, but with a little more precision. And again, I could adjust the precision by turning this down a little bit and saying decrease. It went a little further, so decrease, and then I get the same number. So you can see that I get exactly the same number. So there are a lot of mathematical functions you can use. There are lists of them here, and we will use them, like standard deviations and maximum and minima. All those things are useful functions for us to use.